Hi everyone, I'm Shelly and you're watching There's No Place Like Home. I'm back with another question the narrative video, and today's topic is the Battle of Cynoscephalae? Dogheads? I'm anticipating that this is going to be a longer video than usual, simply because it's something that I have wanted to dive into but haven't had the time. And now it is a rainy day, and my son-in-law's sister is not coming over today when she's usually here during the week. So I have all of this free time on my hands, and I'm going to spend that with you. So the other day when I was recording a video, I happened to come across the Battle of Cynocephalae, and it immediately intrigued me because I had never heard of it before. I didn't even know that there was a region called Cynocephalae, but sure enough, there is. And in case you're wondering why I'm so interested in the Battle of Cynocephalae, it's not for a historical reason. It's simply because cynocephaly, or cynocephalus, means dog head. Just as there are stories of Bigfoot type creatures around the world, of mermaids around the world, of lake monsters and other creatures like that around the world, there are also stories of dog head type creatures around the world. However, the difference is that the cynocephaly creatures are half man, half dog. I know that a lot of times there are sightings in Texas, for example, and in Oklahoma, and I know this thanks to Donita from Prairie Dust. There are dogman encounters. However, the dogman encounters typically, at least seem to me, just to be an upright dog, whereas the cynocephaly beings were said to wear clothing. Now, right here, this is a website for dogman encounters, and you can actually report your encounters. That's how many of them there are. And in fact, this is a still from a surveillance camera that was taken a few years ago back in Texas, and this also was brought to my attention by Donita. And as you can see, it certainly looks like it could be some sort of doghead creature. This was actually on the regular news. It wasn't just in the tabloids. And the owner of the place that had the surveillance camera, they genuinely wanted ideas of what it could possibly be because they were baffled. And if you take a look at this does seem to be more of an upright animal. However, it certainly seems to at least be possibly linked to the cynocephaly creatures that we're going to be talking about today. And these are the ones that I'm actually going to be calling dog heads rather than dog man. First, we'll just read a little bit about the Battle of Cynocephalae, not because it brings up anything about the dog heads, but just so that you know that there is historical context to this. And again, I had no idea that there was something called the Battle of Cynocephalae. So the Battle of Cynocephalae was an encounter battle fought in Thessaly in 197 BC between the Roman army, led by Titus Quinctius Flamininus, and the Antigonid dynasty of Macedon, led by Philip V, during the Second Macedonian War. It was a decisive Roman victory and marked the end of the conflict. And then this just goes on and gives you the history of the Battle of Cynocephalae. And it's, again, I said this before, it's not the battle that intrigues me. It is the name of this area, because I'm starting to wonder if it's possible that this area was named after the types of beings that were living there. Because as I mentioned before, it says the characteristic of cynocephaly or cynocephalus having the head of a canid, typically that of a dog or jackal, is a widely attested mythical phenomenon existing in many different forms and contexts. The literal meaning of cynocephaly is dog-headedness. Now, if you look up Cynocephalae, it will tell you that it was named that after some mountains that looked like dogs. but we know that history often gets whitewashed and the weird stuff gets covered up. So that's why this intrigues me so much. So the literal meaning of cynocephaly is dog-headedness. However, this refers to a human body with a dog head is implied. Such cynocephalics are known in mythology and legend from many parts of the world, including ancient Egypt, India, Greece, and China. Further mentions come from the medieval East and Europe. In modern popular culture, cynocephalics are also encountered as characters in books, comics, and graphic novels. Cynocephaly is generally distinguished from lycanthropy, werewolfism, and dogs that can talk. In addition, the Greeks and Romans called a species of apes cynocephalus. These apes are suspected to be baboons. Now, I have several articles that I'm going to be sharing with you today about the cynocephalus. You would think that I would remember the name of it, but had a blank in my head. But anyway, there's several articles that I'm going to be sharing with you. But as we read the articles, we will find that many of the people who report seeing these creatures did not regard them as animals, but regarded them as people, and sometimes almost as people with some sort of disease that caused their heads to look like dogs. And you might think, well, that's a bit outlandish, isn't it? Not so much, because here we have the Vadoma tribe population. Has nothing to do with dog heads, but they have ostrich feet. Now, obviously not the ostrich feet from the actual birds, but their feet resemble those of ostriches. The Kayamba region in the northern part of Zimbabwe is the home to the Vadoma people. They are well known for having ectrodactyly, or ostrich foot syndrome. A significant portion of their population is affected by a genetic disorder. Ectrodactyly, also referred to as split hand-foot malformation, is a condition marked by the absence of one or more fingers or toes, according to rare disease. The middle fingers or toes are typically affected. In some people, all four hands and feet may be affected. According to a Medium article, ectrodactyly is also known as two-toed or lobster claw syndrome. Among the Vadoma people, ectrodactyly is a unique condition passed down from one generation to the next. So I'm thinking, is it possible that this could have been a unique condition that was also passed down from one person to the next? Due to the shape of their toes, many members of the Vadoma community find it difficult to wear shoes. Although they have two big toes on each foot, they can still climb trees. They can run, but only with a bit of difficulty. If you're interested in reading more about this, I'll leave a link in the description box. But this is just to show you that, yes, there are sometimes genetic conditions that can create these, what we would call abnormalities, that are sometimes, yes, animal-like. So back to this first article that's just from Wikipedia, and I'm not only going to be showing Wikipedia here, I have many other sources, but we're just going to start here. Cynocephaly was familiar to the ancient Greeks from representations of the Egyptian gods. Duamutef, son of Horus, Wepwawet, the opener of the ways, and Anubis, the Egyptian god of the dead. The Greek word doghead also identified a sacred Egyptian baboon with the face of a dog. Rather than literally depicting a hybrid human-animal state, these cynocephalic portrayals of deities conveyed those deities' therianthropic ability to shift between fully human and fully animal states. In an ancient Egypt hybrid image, the head represents the original form of the being depicted, so that, as the Egyptologist Henry Fisher put it, a lion-headed goddess is a lion goddess in human form, while a royal sphinx, conversely, is a man who has assumed the form of a lion. This non-literal approach to depicting deities may have confused visitors from Egypt, leading them to believe that Egyptians worshipped cynocephalic gods, or even that mortal cynocephalic entities populated Egypt. And I'm just going to interject here, or is it possible that these beings actually existed because they were not just spoken of in Egypt, they were spoken of all around the world? Reports of dog-headed races can also be traced back to Greek antiquity. In the 5th century BC, the Greek physician Ctesias, in his Indica, wrote a detailed report on the existence of cynocephaly in India. Similarly, the Greek traveler Megasthenes claimed to know about dog-headed people in India who lived in the mountains, communicated through barking, wore the skins of wild animals, and lived by hunting. Claudius Aelianus also mentioned the dog-headed tribes in India, and he too wrote that they are of human shape and clothed in the skins of beasts. He also added that although they have no speech and howled to communicate, they were capable of understanding the Indian language. Herodotus reports claims by ancient Libyans that such creatures inhabit the east of their lands, as well as headless men and various other anomalies. And yes, I do plan on doing a video on this sometime in the future. Again, that's something that I've mentioned in passing in other videos, or maybe briefly, but I'm hoping to do a more comprehensive video on these at another point in time. So speaking of the tales from from Libya, of people who claim that there are these dogmen creatures, these dog heads living in Libya, this is actually from Libya. This is a rock formation, and it has dog head creatures carved into this. The best estimate for the place where the battle between the Argonauts and the Cynocephali took place is modern-day North Serbia or South Hungary. Some Greek writers also mention the Hemicenes, singular Hemision, meaning half dogs. Now, this one I actually looked up, and this one is a dog bear. So this one, at least from the sources that I've checked, is not half dog, half human. This one is half dog, half bear. There is a description of two saints, Arachus and Ogani, with a dog's head from the legend about the life of the Coptic saint Mercurius Abu Seifain, whom they faithfully served. Their image on the icon is in the Coptic Museum. The cynocephaly offered such an evocative image of the magic and brutality deemed characteristic of bizarre people of distant places that they kept returning in medieval literature. St. Augustine of Hippo mentioned the cynocephaly in the City of God, in the context of discussing whether such beings were descendants of Adam. He considered the possibility that they might not exist at all, or might not be human, which Augustine defines as being a mortal and rational animal, but insisted that if they were human, they were indeed descendants of Adam. Now I'm just going to read this section on St. Christopher, and then we're going to move on to another article. And as always, I always leave all the links in the description box if you want to go back and read the entire thing. I've actually talked about St. Christopher on my channel before. I made this video here, Question the Narrative, Mythical Creatures of the Bible and Judeo-Christian Tradition. And so as you can see, I did mention the idea that St. Christopher was a dog head at one point, but I'll just go over that with you again here. In the Eastern Orthodox Church, certain icons covertly identify St. Christopher with the head of a dog. Christopher pictured with a dog's head is not generally supported by the Orthodox Church, as the icon was proscribed in the 18th century by Moscow. The roots of that iconography lie in a hagiographic narrative set during the reign of the Emperor Diocletian, which tells of a man named Reprobus. These names are something else. Anyway, being captured by Roman forces fighting against tribes dwelling to the west of Egypt in Cyrenaica, and forced to join the Roman numerous Marmaritarum, or unit of the Marmaritae, which suggests an otherwise unidentified Marmaritae, perhaps the same as the Marmaricae Berber tribe of Cyrenaica. He was reported to be of enormous size, with the head of a dog instead of a man, both apparently being typical of the Marmaritae. He and the unit were later transferred to Syrian Antioch, where Bishop Peter of Italia baptized him and where he was martyred in 308. It has also been speculated that this Byzantine depiction of St. Christopher as dog-headed may have resulted from a misreading of the Latin term Cananeus as Caninus, that is, canine. The late 10th century German bishop and poet Walter of Speyer portrayed St. Christopher as a giant of a cynocephalic species in the land of the Canaanians, Canaan in the New Testament, who ate human flesh and barked. Eventually, Christopher met the Christ child, regretted his former behavior, and received baptism. He too was rewarded with a human appearance, whereupon he devoted his life to Christian service and became an Athleta Christi, one of the military saints. Now, while St. Christopher is definitely one of the most well-known cynocephaly creatures, he is far from being the only one. So we'll just head over to another article, Cynocephaly and the Mythological Dog-Headed Human. The characteristics of cynocephaly describes the head of a dog upon a human body. This trait is a theme upon which there are several variations, with representations showing up in several cultures and legends. Tales of human forms with a dog-like head have been told from ancient Egypt to ancient Greek, medieval, and Christian stories. These tales, eliciting both fear and fascination, are like an ancient form of a monster tale, often invoking the idea that cynocephaly is not just a myth or legend, but an actual race of creatures living here on Earth. The appearance of cynocephaly in stories throughout the ages illustrates the ubiquitous nature of the creatures and the flexibility of an image that continuously reoccurs with a similar appearance but varying stories. The most basic description of cynocephaly is that it is the image of a human figure that has the head of a dog, or in some instances, a jackal. This is not to be confused with images of werewolves. Werewolves are a creature where the human forms transform into a dog-like head and body. Some believe that werewolves and cynocephalic creatures are somehow related, but they are more likely two separate types of creatures that happen to share some dog-like traits. The name cynocephaly sounds much more like an actual disease than a depiction of an image or a human with a dog head shown in prehistoric drawings and renderings. And that is what I was alluding to as I talked about the Vedoma tribe. The name is derived from the Greek language, in which cyno means dog and cephaly means a disease or condition of the head. Put together, cynocephaly is a disease or condition where the head is in the form of a dog. Next, we're moving on to another article, Cynocephalus. The cynocephali are a mythological, quote, mythological race of dog-headed humanoids, variously said to inhabit many parts of the world, including Africa, India, Europe, an island in the Pacific, the Andaman Islands, or even the Caribbean. They are featured in the mythology of numerous cultures and have been known by multiple different names. For instance, in Turkish myth, they are known as Itbaraks, as described in the Oguz Kagan narrative. And so I actually pulled up the Wikipedia about that. Itbaraks, or just baraks, are Turkic mythological creatures. They were dog-headed, dark-colored, manly creatures. According to the Oguz Kagan narratives, their country was in the unknown northwest. It can be assumed that it's around today's Siberia. Oguz tried to invade them but couldn't succeed, so he had to retreat to a small island. A huge part of Oguz Kagan narratives was about invasions on dog-headed men. Turks called them Itbaraks. It means dog, and barak means a dark, shaggy dog species. When Oguz Kagan's invasion on Itbaraks failed and he retreated to a small island, one of his dead soldiers' widow wife, could be a beautiful Itbarak woman, gave birth. Oguz Kagan and his people had no home or tent, so the woman had to give birth to his child in a hollow. Oguz named this child Kipkak, meaning hollow in Old Turkic. When Oguz Kagan had invaded Itbarak lands after 17 years, he gave the lands to Kipkak to rule. Year after year, Kipkak's lineage has believed to become the Old Turkic tribe Kipchaks. And this says Oguz Kagan narratives, the text about Itbaraks in the narratives. Barak, that's what the Turks called the shaggy dog. That's how they named the big noble dog. The Barak is told in the sagas. It was believed to be other dogs' ancestor. This dog was noble and enormously big. Hunting and shepherd dogs was his sons. In the northwestern Asia, there was Itbarak. Turks were far away from them in the Middle Asia. They had body of a man, head of a dog. Their color was dark, like the black devil. Their women was pretty and didn't run away from the Turks. They were medicated. You couldn't spear them. The saga said Oghuz Kagan was defeated. He tried to recover on the island he retreated. After 17 years, Oghuz defeated them. Women helped him, and the war has ended. Oghuz gave his territory to Kipchak Beg, so Turks called the area Kipchak. Stories about dog-headed men can be found in many other mythologies. Europeans called them Boris and believed they were living in northern parts of today's northern Europe. The Itboroks were believed to live in pretty much the same area. So continuing on from this one, it says the Greek poet Hesiod refers to them as Hemicines, singular Hemicyon, and identifies them as one of the many races descended from the goddess Gaia and the Egyptian demigod Epaphus. Now, again, I did go and look that up, and that is actually a dog bear, which is why I really didn't get much more into that here. Cynocephali have been described in Herodotus' histories as one of the native inhabitants of ancient Libya, along with the Acaphaloi. They were reportedly encountered in the Middle East by Alexander the Great, who wrote about them to his tutor Aristotle. They were also encountered and battled by the Argonauts in their journey, which I did mention earlier in another article that I read. Ctesias's Indica firmly places these creatures in India, along with other strange species, such as the cyopods. And I really encourage you to look at some of these creatures. They are very, very interesting. Ctesias describes the cynocephali as inhabiting caves in the Indian mountains as far as the river Indus, wearing clothes made from the skin of wild animals, eating raw meat, although they leave it under the sun to dry, and being extremely just, like the rest of the Indians with whom they associate. Although they understand the languages spoken by humans in India, they are incapable of speaking them and instead communicate with each other by barking. Physically, they're described with dark skin, large teeth, larger than those of a common dog, and nails that are similar to a dog's claws, except for being longer and rounder. Their tails are also longer and hairier than dog tails, and they are very swift hunters, skilled with the bow and arrow. They live longer than humans, having an average lifespan of about 170 or even 200 years. The Indians refer to them as Calistri and claim they number about 120,000 total. Ctesias goes on to describe the culture and social habits of the dog-headed ones. The women have a bath once a month. The men do not have a bath at all, but only wash their hands. They anoint themselves 3 times a month with oil made from milk and wipe themselves with skins. The clothes of men and women alike are not skins with the hair on, but skins tanned and very fine. The richest wear linen clothes, but they are few in number. They have no beds, but sleep on leaves or grass. He who possesses the greatest number of sheep is considered the richest, and so in regard to their other possessions. Although he initially claims that they do not practice any trade but live by hunting, he later goes on to describe some habits which seem to include commerce. They also rear numbers of sheep, goats, and asses, drinking the milk of the sheep and whey made from it. They eat the fruit of the Siptacora, whence amber is procured, since it is sweet. They also dry it and keep it in baskets, and the Greeks keep their dried grapes. They make rafts, which they load with this fruit together with well-cleaned purple flowers and 260 talents of amber, with the same quantity of the purple dye and 1,000 additional talents of amber, which they send annually to the King of India. They exchange the rest for bread, flour, and cotton stuffs with the Indians, from whom they also buy swords for hunting wild beasts, bows, and arrows, being very skillful in drawing the bow and hurling the spear. They cannot be defeated in war, since they inhabit lofty and inaccessible mountains. Every 5 years the king sends them a present of 300,000 bows, as many spears, 120,000 shields, and 50,000 swords. Roman authors such as Pliny the Elder and Claudius Aelianus also gave a closely matching description of the cynocephalies' culture, even though they placed them in Africa rather than India. It's worth noting that Aelianus still regarded these creatures as mere animals, due to their inarticulate and unintelligible speech, even though he acknowledges that they're intelligent, practice agriculture and animal husbandry, understand human speech, and do not attack people. Similarly, Saint Isidore of Seville would also classify them as beasts rather than people. Next, we're going to read a portion from an article called Cynocephaly, the Dog-Headed Race, a Brief Introduction. The earliest sources of monstrous races, including the dog-headed cynocephaly, derived from Greek geographers such as Megasthenes, who traveled to India and reportedly witnessed monstrous races firsthand. The Greek explorer and ethnographer was sent as an ambassador to the court of Santracatus in India around 303 BC. However, he has further stated that he owed much of his knowledge of the monstrous races from the Brahmins, an esteemed class of philosophers. What has since been revealed is that he likely confused Indian mythology with ethnography from Rudolf Wittkower, linking the representation of monstrous races back to Indian epics themselves. As exploration by Europeans increased, the cynocephaly were pushed to lesser-known corners of the world. Cynocephaly were later claimed to have lived on the islands of the Pacific Ocean in the Middle Ages. Explorer Marco Polo claimed that the cannibals lived on Andaman Islands, while John Mandeville placed them on the Nicobar Islands. It was in the 16th century that the cynocephaly found themselves located in the New World, with the publication of Auslegung der Merkarthen oder Carta Marina by Lawrence Fries. Despite no empirical evidence of their existence, coupled with exploration of the East, the myth of monstrous races lived on. John Bloch Friedman, in his study of monstrous races in the medieval period, noted that there was a need to believe in the monstrous races, which included such factors as fantasy, escapism, delight in the exercise of imagination, and fear of the unknown. And again, I'm just going to interject here that it could be those things, but I also find it very, very interesting that these creatures were said to live all over the world. So it wasn't just confined to certain areas, to certain localities where they came up with their own folklore. Not only was the description of these creatures very, very similar, but their culture was very, very similar. How they communicated with each other was very, very similar. So I don't think that we should just write these off just because, there's no populations that we know of today. It doesn't mean that they were not existing at these times. I believe that if it was some sort of genetic anomaly, it was just reduced over the generations, and they became less and less and less until they possibly went extinct. Now, I just scrolled down a little bit further in this article, and I'm going to share with you a section that I know is going to intrigue a lot of you, especially those who are fascinated by Tartaria and that ancient empire. It says here, there has been a long tradition of describing dog-headed warriors within an army to instill fear within their enemy. Marco Polo wrote of Tartars that had cynocephaly in their army. As Marco Polo wrote, Tartar chiefs, with their dog's head followers, ate the bodies of their victims like so much bread. They were also described as enemies in the English version of Richard Coeur de Lion as heathen hounds. The Muslim ruler Saladin is depicted with the head of a dog in Alexander of Bremen's 13th century illuminated Expositio in Apocalypsum from Saxony. In another image in the same source, Muhammad is represented as a dog standing on his hind legs next to the devil. Jews were also rendered with dogs' heads before Christ in the 9th century illuminated manuscript. The association between Jews and dogs was derived from the New Testament that used dogs as a metaphor for Jews in Matthew 15:26. In this way, the motif of the canine-headed men had a long tradition in portraying perceived heretical others. And here we have another depiction of that right here. So, right there we have a symbolic use, a bit of an inflammatory use of the dog heads. But again, we do have what seems to be a very strong oral tradition of flesh and blood creatures that may have then been used to defame certain characters. But nonetheless, I do believe there is strong evidence that these did exist. Different interpretations exist on how the monstrous races came into being, both during the early modern period and in contemporaneous literature. During the 16th century, monstrous races were interpreted as either animal, the descendants of Adam and therefore man, or the products of bestiality and therefore sin. In contemporary literature, monstrous races have been considered to be the result of errors in perception, or the difficulty in explaining different physical characteristics by early explorers. Peter Burke argued that the monstrous races were originally formulated from stereotyped perceptions of people from Asia and Africa. For example, the practice of body modification that has endured in some African cultures today may have been past construed as a form of monstrosity. The use of discs to expand and modify the shape of the mouth or ears to stretch the skin may have served as inspiration for different races believed to have large lips or ears. And again, I'm going to say that that is possibly true. However, you do not find that in all of the places where these creatures were said to live, particularly in Europe. And I don't believe that they do those sorts of things in India. And now I mentioned before that St. Christopher is likely the most well-known doghead, but we cannot forget Anubis from Egyptian mythology as well. And indeed, St. Christopher may be the most well-known doghead in the Christian world, but if we're going to take the secular world or worldwide civilizations, I'm going to admit that Anubis is likely the most popular now that I think about it. So now I pulled up yet another article. I told you I had a lot. Again, I'm not going to share the entire thing. I'm just reading kind of snippets to you so that I can maybe pique your interest and if you would like to go and explore these things as well. Because I think that it's fun, to get into this sort of thing. It's a nice escape. It's, just something to kind of break the monotony of the day, right? So this is called Dogman History, Truth, or Legend. Have there ever been dog-like humans, canid humanoids, or bipedal canines in recorded history? Are these indigenous beings or interdimensional flesh and blood entities? The cynocephali, or cynocephaly, were an Indian and African tribe of dog-headed men. And I'm going to interject here that it went beyond India and Africa. As we heard before, they were also said to be in Europe, especially Northern Europe. Some of them were said to be in Siberia. So definitely not just located in India and Africa. The name cynocephalos means dog-headed, from kuan, a dog, and cephalos, head. On these, the Indian mountains, there live men with the head of a dog, whose clothing is the skin of wild beasts. They speak no language but bark like dogs, and in this manner make themselves understood by each other. Now, since we've read a lot of these things already, I'm just going to go down to a different section because there are some things, I believe it was this article, that have some information that we did not get from the others. And here's just a depiction of one of the other creatures that I'm hoping to do a video on at some point. Okay, down here it says there are some other references to this is spelled with a K, so I'm going to say cynocephaly here. I know that it's different, but anyway, I'm just going to go with the flow. In the same part of India as the crimson dye beetles are born the cynocephaloi, as they are called, a name which they owe to their physical appearance and nature. For the rest, they are of human shape and go about clothed in the skins of beasts, and they are upright and injure no man, and though they have no speech, they howl. Yet they understand the Indian language. Wild animals are their food, and they catch them with the utmost ease, for they are exceedingly swift of foot, and when they have caught them, they kill and cook them, not over a fire, but by exposing them to the sun's heat after they have shredded them into pieces. So as you can see, this is very similar to some of the other accounts that we've read. They also keep goats and sheep, and while their food is the flesh of wild beasts, their drink is the milk of the animals they keep. I have mentioned them along with brute beasts, as is logical, for their speech is inarticulate, unintelligible, and not that of man. After traversing the Egyptian oasis, one is confronted for 7 whole days with utter desert. Beyond this live the human cynoprosopoi, dog faces, along the road that leads to Ethiopia. It seems that these creatures live by hunting gazelles and antelopes. Further, they are black in appearance and they have the head and teeth of a dog. And since they resemble this animal, it is very natural that I should mention them here. They are, however, not endowed with speech, but utter a shrill squeal. Beneath their chin hangs down a beard. We may compare it with the beards of dracones, and strong and very sharp nails cover their hands. Their whole body is covered with hair, another respect in which they resemble dogs. They are very swift of foot and know the regions that are inaccessible. That is why they appear so hard to capture. You may have noticed as I was reading that I kind of paused when it said dracones or dracone, because I'm thinking, does that mean dragon? And sure enough, I went and checked it, and that is what it means. So it's comparing the beards of these dog-head creatures to that of the beards of dragons, and I find that very interesting. Anyway, here's another reference. Men go by the sea ocean by many isles, unto an isle that is called Nakumera. That is a good isle and fair, and it is in compass about more than 1,000 mile. And all the men and women of that isle have hounds' heads, and they be called cynocephalis, Greek for dogs' heads. And they be full reasonable and of good understanding, save that they worship an ox for their god. And also every one of them beareth an ox of gold or silver in his forehead, in token that they love well their God. And they go all naked, save a little clout. So that is a little different, because the other accounts they are wearing animal skins. They be great folk and well fighting, and they have a great targe shield that covereth all the body, and a spear in their hand to fight with. And if they take any man in battle, anon they eat him. The Travels of Sir John Mandeville. And down here it says, in the Chinese record history of the Liang dynasty, the Buddhist missionary Hui Sheng describes an island of dog-headed men to the east of Fusang, a nation he visited variously identified as Japan or the Americas. The history of northern dynasties of Li Yanchu, a Tang dynasty historian, also mentions the dog kingdom. The Travels of Marco Polo mentions the dog-headed barbarians on the island of Angamain, or the Andaman Islands. Polo states that although these people grow spices, they are nonetheless cruel and are all just like big mastiff dogs, which again is very different from the other accounts because they are said to be very civilized in the other accounts. And the last article that I'm going to be sharing with you, I actually had to have translated. I had to use Google Translate or whatever they call it, because it was in, I believe, Vietnamese. So if it sounds a little off while I'm reading it, it may be just because of translation issues. It says mysterious creevers of ancients. I'm wondering if it means creatures. I don't know. But it's cynocephali dog heads. And again, I'm just going to kind of skim through because we have covered a lot of the information in here. But there is some that we have not read elsewhere. And so that's what I'm trying to do here. I'm just trying to gather it all together. The earliest known references to cynocephaly were found in Libya, carved into cliffs and cobblestones on a plateau 4,000 years ago. Among the stone carvings of giraffes and elephants are two dog-headed people. Other images in the area include a dog-headed person with a dog-headed child standing at the foot and carrying a dog, or an extinct cow-like animal, aurochs, is carried on the shoulders of a dog-headed man. In ancient Greece, cynocephaly became familiar to the Greeks through the representatives of the Egyptian gods, such as Duamutef, one of the 4 children of the Horus Wepwawet. His name means the man who paves the way, the god of the wolf who protects and leads the dead through the underworld, and Anubis, the son of Nephthys, and Seth, the most important god of death. Anubis has a black head, while Wepwawet has a gray or white head. Also in the century in which Theseus lived, the great historian Herodotus, which we have mentioned in this video before, also described that such creatures lived in eastern Libya, as well as Blemmyes-headed people and many other anomalies. A century later, the explorer Megasthenes returned from travels to India, claiming to have dog-headed people living in the Indian mountains, communicating by barking, wearing wild animal skins, and living by hunting. In the 2nd century, the author and Roman orator Claudius Aelianus, like Ctesias, his descriptions of cynocephaly were in great detail and consistent with what was mentioned in Indica. He was also excited to think that a drinking cynocephaly would be quite interesting. And there's a depiction of some dog-headed men. Decades later, the proclamation of Ctesias, the 4th century BC, Alexander the Great invading India, and he also declared by letter to his famous philosopher Aristotle that he had seen cynocephaly. He even claimed to have caught some people and described them as the ferocious barking growls in his letter to Aristotle. He included a manuscript that we now know is the famous epic poem Beowulf. Beyond the ancient Egyptian and Greek era, about 1,500 years later, the original documents on cynocephaly, many explorers, conquerors, and even Christian missionaries claimed to have seen and interacted with these dog-headed people. Even King Arthur was involved in witnesses when he and his army were accused of defeating a group of soldiers with heads of dogs in the mountains surrounding Edinburgh, Scotland. Further down in the article, it says, in the 13th century, famous explorers Marco Polo and Giovanni da Pian del Carpine all mentioned cynocephaly. Giovanni writes about the army of the Thirst Radio, the third son of Genghis Khan and the second Khan of the Mongol Empire, who clashed with the head of dogs living in the north of the Dalai Lama, Northern Glacier or Lake Baikal. Marco Polo described cynocephaly as the manly eaters. During his journey to Angamanian Island off the coast of Burma in the Indian Ocean, he said they had no king and considered them not inferior to wild animals. He described them as mastiffs clam oa. I don't know what that means. He said they were a ruthless generation and they would eat anyone who was caught by them, otherwise of their race. And honestly, I'm just wondering, since that account differs so much from other accounts of these beings, I'm wondering if it's just Marco Polo kind of being a bit fearful of them and maybe just making assumptions. I don't know. In cynocephaly's oldest writing documents in India and Persia, moving westwards over time, stories become more violent and equals more barbaric. Well, okay. In the 15th century, Christopher Columbus. I paused him just because I don't even know if he really existed, but that's for another video to begin with, came to Haiti in the most undesirable situation where he claimed to have seen men with one eye and others with a dog's nose were flesh-eating, and when they caught the enemy, they cut off their heads, drank blood, and cut the victims into several parts. Finally, cynocephaly appeared in Chinese legends, mentioned in the works called The History of the Liang Dynasty. In the work of the Buddhist missionary Hui Sin describes an island in the east of the land of Fusang, the mysterious land of the east, today is said to be just the country of Japan, the place of the wild creatures. The Tang Dynasty historian Li also described a dog kingdom, in the history of the northern dynasties. And then it just finishes up. In other legends, also mentions some dog-headed creatures such as Itbarak, which we did talk about in Turkish mythology, Soglav in Serbian mythology, or werewolves, which I believe are separate beings from the dogheads. I also do not believe that werewolves and dogheads are the same creatures. According to the French historian Henri Courier, the origin of all the fables of dogs, whether European, Arab, or Chinese, can be found in the novel The Romance of Alexander. But no matter what, cynocephaly has always been a mystery in the mystery of ancient mystical creatures. So that's what I gathered up together to share with you today. There are actually a lot more articles on dogheads out there that you can find. I just thought that this was a good round narration of what the accounts are, and I'm actually honestly surprised that they are not given more attention, like, you know, like Bigfoot creatures and like lake monsters, because the stories of them are so just prevalent worldwide in folklore, and they go from all the way from before Christ, you know, up to Marco Polo's time, and even now, again, as I mentioned before, when we talk about the dogman in Texas. I'm trying to find where that one was at. There we go. So we have dogmen reports in the United States, not just in Texas, but in Oklahoma. I believe there was even there are some in Pennsylvania as well. You could probably find doghead reports in almost every state. And at least one of the articles did mention that one of the lands that they were talking about may very well have been the Americas that, you know, these creatures were said to live in. And, you know, on initial inspection, I just looked at this and thought, well, the body of this creature is still pretty animal-like. You know, it looks furry. But, you know, if we think about it, if you take into consideration the accounts that they do wear animal skins, I don't know. Could this be a fake? It could be. But just the fact that the owner of this camera just so, they so seriously wanted the opinion of people. And, you know, people said that this was so many things. Someone said Bigfoot, and I think obviously you can look at this body and see that it's not Bigfoot, at least in my opinion. It's way too slender to be a Bigfoot. And if this is indeed its snout, I don't think that a large snout is also indicative of a Bigfoot. Some have said that it was a chupacabra, and I don't believe that it's a chupacabra either. It does. If it were anything, I would certainly say a dog man, or possibly even a dog head that this was, in my opinion. But anyway, I think that I shared everything with you that I wanted to. I hope that you enjoyed this more lighthearted video, because I love history, but I especially love history that's mixed in with some folklore. Anyway, that's all that I have for you today. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed and would like to hear more of what I have to say, I would love if you would do that. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave one right here. And if you like my work and would like to support my page, I will leave a link in the description to my channel membership, or you can just click on it right on my page. And I hope you have a great day.